First off, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to come tonight, and I want to make sure that everybody can hear me and see the slides okay. Tonight's talk is about the Appalachian Trail, as you can tell by this sign. Many of you were here in November when I talked about the book Exploring Galena and Dubuque on Foot. That book's available online and locally. But before I wrote that book, I wrote this book, Long Distance Hiking on the Appalachian Trail for the Older Adventurer. And the term older adventure comes from that there's two basic populations that are doing long distance hikes on the Appalachian Trail. There's young people who are maybe just out of college, still in college. They haven't started their careers yet or started a family, and they're probably living on their parents' dime. Then there's people, 40, 45 and up, who are maybe coming out of the military, maybe something traumatic has happened in their life, such as a death of a loved one, or perhaps they've started retiring. But the one thing that the 45 and up group all have in common is that they've been able to carve out the time to be able to do a long distance hike, whether it's a long section of the trail or the entire trail. For most people, to do the entire trail is about a 5 or 6 month endeavor. But one of the things what I'd like to do, just to give you an idea of what a long distance hike is like, I want to read the preface, just a passage from the preface from the second edition. Perhaps my biggest realization over these years is that a long distance hike is as much a lifestyle choice as it is a hike, maybe even more so. Rather than being a break from your everyday life, it is your everyday life. It is a lifestyle of simplicity, clarity, and peace that is hard to find anywhere else. It could be the longest period of time in your life where you will be removed from the demands of the everyday work world and your normal household responsibilities. It will be a life where you'll spend most of your time outdoors, immersed in nature, and living only on what is in your backpack. For the right person with the right approach, it can be an amazing and positive experience. And then I just want to read one other passage, and then we'll get started on the Appalachian Trail. Okay. One of the things you can do to prevent the hike from becoming a never-ending walk on a treadmill through a green tunnel is to take advantage of your reduced pace to observe. If you do, you will notice changes in the light, the pickup of a breeze, and the skittering of a creature. You will notice how each day is different. A slight change in the temperature or the exposure of a mountainside will completely alter the character of the trail. One stretch will be covered with small flowers and butterflies, while a few hundred feet further up on the other side of the mountain, there will be thousands of grasshoppers stirring up down leaves as if they were making popcorn. You notice these because you've slowed your pace to allow yourself to experience the present. Even when these opportunities last only a second, you will remember them long after you leave the trail, and all the struggles you go through will become worthwhile. So the Appalachian Trail itself runs from Georgia all the way up to Maine. It starts at Springer Mountain in Georgia, and this is the actual starting point of the trail. And if you notice in the upper left-hand corner, that white blaze, well, you'll be following white blazes all the way to Maine. And then this is where the trail ends. It ends up on the top of Mount Katahdin in northern Maine. And that's actually the highest elevation gain on the trail in one shot, that it's about a 4,000 foot climb to get to the summit of the trail. But so that's where it begins and ends. And because Springer Mountain is the trail starts on top of Springer Mountain. You can't drive to the start of the trail. You could take Forest Service roads and get within 1.5 miles of the trail and then start from there. But many people, they'll take the approach trail from Amicalola Falls State Park in the north part of Georgia. And this is the visitors center there at the park. And if you notice, everything is kind of green and there's buds on the redbud tree. And so in late spring, when most people start their hike, late March or April, everything is balmy in Atlanta and at the base of Springer Mountain. And you'll go through this arch. You'll be taking these stairs along Amicalola Falls on your way up to Springer Mountain. Now, one thing I do want to point out is this picture was a hike I did in, I think it was 2011. And I just want you to look at the backpack there. That pack probably, with everything in it, probably weighed about 30 pounds. When I first did the trail, started in 1997, that pack probably weighed 65 pounds. And that's one of the things that has happened in hiking over the years, is people have figured out how to make backpacks and all the equipment lighter. And also, and I have to say, when I started with 65 pounds, that weight was staggering. And I quickly whittled it down to about 40 pounds because when you have a 65-pound backpack, you'll take off your packing. You feel like a balloon that's going to float in the air, and you have to grab a branch to keep from floating away. So that's one of the things that's nice, is that there are better, the equipment has gotten better. And as that has happened, more people have been able to complete a long distance hike on the trail. But one of the things, as you're going up, you'll notice that where it was, nice and balmy spring in Atlanta or down at the base of the mountain, as you get higher up the mountain, you are now getting into very, very early spring or late winter. And if you notice, there aren't any buds on the trees at all. And just looking, and from the top of Springer Mountain, this is the view that you'll have in early spring, that there's, it's really quite big. There are no buds on the trees. And at Springer Mountain, you'll have, there are shelters. And that's one thing about the Appalachian Trail. There are shelters all along the trail. So you could possibly sleep in a shelter for most of the nights. But you'll probably need to carry some kind of backup plan, because a shelter may not be there when you're ready to stop, and the shelter could be crowded when you get there. But one of the things that the shelters offer, there's plenty of places to pitch a tent. They all have springs nearby for gathering water. And so that's part of the Appalachian Trail experience, is that in the shelters, there's registers so people can write messages to other people or write their feelings. And so as you hike along, you develop a sense of community. And just to show you some of the other ways, this is another shelter that would be along the trail. And you can see that everybody is sort of gathering there after a day of hiking. My preference was to stay in a tent. And one of the things that you'll find when you do a long distance hike is that you'll develop a whole set of routines. And that's what makes everything so clear, because you'll get up in the morning, you'll pack up your tent, your sleeping bag, make something to eat, and take off. And that's all you're going to do, is you're going to walk through that's what you're going to do, is you're just going to walk through the woods. And then when you're done walking, you'll set up camp again. You'll gather water. You'll make something to eat, and perhaps update a journal, read, and go to sleep. And that's just how simple your life is that it's just what's in the backpack and what's outdoors available to you. So another aspect of the culture along the trail is trail magic. And this guy was at a Forest Service road crossing, and he was handing out sodas and snacks to hikers as they went by. And this type of trail magic was available all the way along the trail. And it's typically people who have hiked the trail before and they wanted to give something back, or it could be people who've always wanted to do the trail but couldn't, and they still wanted to participate. And here's an example at a road crossing where there was this national forest bulletin board. There's Coca-Cola cans up there, they were put up there by somebody for hikers to take. And probably the best example of trail magic that I encountered, this was in Stokoe Gap in North Carolina. And by the way, the hike out of Stokoe Gap was really steep, but there was a man from Chattanooga, about 120 miles away, who wanted to have his birthday party with hikers. He was in his 50s. He had an injury to his knee, so he never could do a long distance hike, but he wanted to spend that time with hikers. So he and his family, they drove 120 miles and they set up this spread of hot dogs, sodas, potato chips, coleslaw, birthday cake and ice cream for all the hikers passing by. So that's part of the Appalachian Trail experience, is just always running into these type of magical events. And then another thing that you'll experience is that you'll be dealing with trail towns. And one of the things that makes the Appalachian Trail, it's not easy, but it is doable, is there's two things. One is you've got plenty of water all along the trail. Maybe a drought year might be different, but in a normal year, you have plenty of water, which means that you only have to carry 1 quart of water with you. When you run out of water, there'll be a stream or a spring where you can refill and continue on with your hike. The other thing is that you'll be reaching road crossings on a regular basis. And from there, you can hitchhike or get a ride into a nearby town. Sometimes they're right on the road, but many times, usually they're off the road, but getting a ride is very simple. And this is actually in Helen, Georgia. Helen, Georgia is this town in North Georgia that has adopted a Swiss Alps theme. And so all the buildings are sort of in a Swiss Alps decor. And this is the Rapunzel room at the Hellendorfer Inn. But what these towns provide is they provide the ability to resupply, to stay at a motel, take a shower, catch up on business, and then you can continue with your hike. And because they're the frequency, you only have to carry maybe 4 or 5 days worth of food in your backpack. And that also contributes to reducing the weight of what you're carrying. And then here's an example in New York State where there's the Appalachian Trail goes right across this marsh on some wooden planks to get through the marsh. And right there at that road crossing where the Appalachian Trail crosses the road, there's a little grocery store and gas stations. So if you're hiking, you could go in there, get a soda, get a hamburger, maybe even pick up some supplies right on the trail. And so now getting back to our hike back in Georgia, you can see that you've got some wonderful views. But again, when you're in Georgia, it's going to be, if you're starting in March or April, it's still going to be very much early spring. And you might even have a few days where there's snow, but it's late enough in the winter or early spring that if it does snow, it's not going to be much, and it's not going to be enough to stop you from hiking. If you're starting in January or February, it might be a different story. But certainly if you're starting in late March or April, it'll just be, just make everything pretty as you go along. And then, but this is also in North Georgia, and this is at Lehigh Gap. It's 30 miles up the trail. And the trail actually goes through a building here at Neal's Gap. And this is an outfitter called Mountain Crossings. And so if you find yourself, where there's something wrong with your equipment that maybe you're getting blisters, maybe it's too heavy, they can help you reduce your pack weight, figure out how to get rid of the blisters, and help you ship things home. And so it's like a crisis center right on the Appalachian Trail. And what's good about it being, 30 miles from Springer Mountain, or let's say a little less than 40 miles from Amicalola Falls, is that you've done enough hiking to know what's not working, what's too heavy, and they specialize in rescuing people's hikes. So that is really a perk on the Appalachian Trail. Then this picture here, this is at the state line between Georgia and North Carolina. And when you reach that state line, which is a little less than 80 miles into your hike, you feel like you've conquered the world, because you actually are feeling some progress, because the Appalachian Trail itself is 2,180 miles long. And so when you cross that line, you realize, oh, geez, well, Maine's just around the corner, 2,000 miles away, or 2,100 miles away, but still you're making that progress. And that's another aspect of a long distance hike, is that if you think about so much of what we do in our life is just pushing air, where we really don't feel like we're making any progress or accomplishing anything, especially if you work in an office environment where there's, a lot of, friction, and you just, as I say, it's just pushing air. But when you're hiking the trail, you can see that you're making progress. You can look on the map and say, hey, I'm making some progress. The other thing is that you'll find progress in yourself. You don't have to be an Olympian athlete to do this. You don't have to be in fantastic shape when you start. Because of the availability of supply and water, you can set your own pace and start working it up and up and up. But what you'll find, and I found myself, is as I was going up a mountain, I might see a bunch of trees and say, okay, fine, I'm going to get to the 10th tree and then I'll rest. Well, then I find myself at the 5th tree stopping. But then a little bit later on, you get to that 10th tree. And pretty soon after that, you blow by it. And eventually you get to the point where you don't stop until you get to the top of the mountain. And at that point, you look forward to the uphills as opposed to the downhills, because you've really walked yourself into, fantastic conditions. So that's an aspect that you're feeling progress all the time as you're doing your hike. When you get into North Carolina from Georgia, you start running into these places. This is Siler Bald. And these southern balds are what they called. They're meadows on top of mountains, which are way below the meteorological tree line. So this mountaintop should have trees, but it has a meadow. And there's no real agreement as to the cause, but it was probably a result of, Native Americans clearing the land to promote hunting, or early settlers, European American settlers clearing land for settlement. But nobody really knows for sure. It's just not documented what created these balls. So then, but as you keep going, you do cross Fontana Dam, and that's a TVA dam, Tennessee Valley Authority Dam. It's the tallest dam east of the Mississippi River. And when you cross that dam, you're entering Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And now you're going to be going on the North Carolina-Tennessee border as you go through the park. And in this picture, when I entered the park, it was just a balmy day in there. It was so warm, and there were all these flowers. and then the next day it snowed. And this happens to be, and again, it wasn't a snow that would stop you or force you off the mountain. It was just just a couple of inches, so you could easily keep hiking, and it certainly made everything very pretty. And this also is in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And then when you get north of the park, this is another one of those balds. This is Max Patch, which is on the Tennessee-North Carolina border. And then pretty soon after that, you get into the trail town of Hot Springs, North Carolina. And then here's a hiker coming, so the trail comes right through that little town. And so what's interesting about older and younger hikers is that, a younger hiker who's just out of college, they have, a young person has a tremendous need for socialization. So the younger hikers will be going a million miles an hour like jackrabbits. They'll get to a town like Hot Springs and they'll spend 3 or 4 days there to hang out with friends, where meanwhile, the older hiker who's going at a much, more relaxed pace, they'll get to they'll get to a place like Hot Springs and maybe just spend a half a day there to resupply and keep on going. So really, the older and younger hikers cover the same amount of distance, in the same period of time. It's just that the younger hikers are spending a lot of the time hanging out with friends in these small towns. So then, as you can see, you're just going through wonderful scenery. This is the Roan Highlands, which is on the North Carolina Tennessee border again. And then eventually you get into Virginia, and you start running into southbound hikers in the form of these cows. And there's even a section in Virginia near Mount Rogers, which is the highest point in Virginia, where there's wild ponies in the area. And this is all, but one of the things that you notice as you're going north, further into the calendar, you can see that leaves are starting to come out, that it's starting to try and get spring. There'll still be plenty of, there'll still be plenty of time with rain and cold weather. As you can see right here, there's cloudy and rain, but it is starting to get spring in the air. And then all of a sudden, boom, like in the, first part, around, maybe the second week of May, all of a sudden it's spring and flowers have popped out everywhere. There's everywhere you go, there's flowers. And then as you go, and one of the things, spring only lasts for 2 weeks, and then you're well into summer. But along with the flowers, the little life is starting to come out. And when you do the Appalachian Trail, you'll see bears, you'll see moose, you'll see plenty of big animals, but most of what you're going to see are little things. And it's being able to observe these little things that can make a long distance hike just a wonderful experience. Such as the centipede, or noticing, moths, the caterpillars like this, or the red eft here. And in this case, right there, if you can see my arrow, that's a salamander. When I was walking by, the salamander had been sunning on the rock. The salamander heard me come, jumped into the water, and then popped his head out to see what I was going to do. And we probably spent, at least 5 or 6 minutes just looking at each other before I continued on. And that's also part of, the experience, or noticing the how a lightning bolt had hit this tree to create that gash in it. And now, or this sandstone wall with a lichen peeling off of it. And that's one of the things, that's what I talked about in that quote, is if you can just slow your mind down, accept the low stimulation of the forest, then all of a sudden you'll just see that it's just full of life and so much to discover everywhere. And then just returning to our hike, this isn't when I did my long distance hike. This one I did a shorter hike, and that's Petey. Petey helped me do the Galena book. He Petey and I did all of the walks in Galena, all the stairways, but we did this hike on the Appalachian Trail, and this is McAfee Knob, which is not too far from Roanoke, Virginia. So you have some really gorgeous views in this particular area. And I don't know if you've ever read the book Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, but by Annie Dillard, but that book won the Pulitzer Prize maybe 50 years ago or so. It's kind of a naturalist book along the lines of Walden. Well, the Appalachian Trail crosses Tinker Creek just a few miles from where Annie Dillard was living when she wrote the book. So these are just little things that you sort of spot along the way. Now in this picture here, this was in the state of Virginia, and you can see these are apple trees with blossoms on it. And so this is at one time, this was an orchard, but you can see these trees have gone completely wild. So I don't know, I didn't go back there in the fall, so I don't know if these trees still make apples or not. But one of the things to think about is landscape is constantly changing. That if we were doing this hike 150 years ago, we wouldn't be going through woods. We'd be going through small farms and orchards. That this happens to be in Virginia. When you get east of the Hudson River in New York State and Massachusetts and Connecticut, you start running into these stone walls. And again, 175 years ago, these would have been small farms. But if you look at the ground, you can see it's awfully rocky. So as soon as land became available in Illinois and Indiana, people got out of here because there was much better farmland to the west. But you can still see the remnants of the homesteads that they had, here east of the Hudson River. And then this picture is taken from the top of Bear Mountain, which is the tallest mountain in Connecticut. And we're looking out across, and this area is kind of like, there's a lot of, wealthy people live here because we're kind of in the, far outskirts of New York and Boston. So a lot of people have country estates here, but you can see that the land is mostly wooded. Again, if we were hiking 150, 175 years ago, the ratio of cleared land to wooded land would be completely reversed. What we'd be looking at mostly would be farms in the distance rather than woods. And now we'll go pick up our hike again. In the Appalachian Trail, we're right here. This is crossing the James River. And then shortly after the James River, you're very close to the Shenandoah Valley. But also you might want to notice that the air is getting more humid. By this time, this is early June. This is full summer. It's hot. So where before you were dealing with cold weather, now you're just wearing a t-shirt and shorts. And, because it's now starting to get quite warm. And then you reach Harpers Ferry. Harpers Ferry is the psychological halfway point of the trail. The actual halfway point is still a little bit further north in Pennsylvania. But this is where the headquarters for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy is located. This is the organization that manages the trail. And certainly if you're contemplating doing a hike on the Appalachian Trail, I recommend that you get a membership in the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, because if it weren't for them, there wouldn't be the Appalachian Trail. But it's at Harpers Ferry where you cross the Potomac River. That the Potomac River is coming in from the left, the Shenandoah is coming in from the right, and the waterway proceeds going, southeast, and soon get to Washington, D.C. In fact, in Harpers Ferry, you can catch a commuter train to take you into Washington, D.C. if you wanted to have like a little weekend trip, little side trip from the trail. But you cross the Potomac River on the old railroad bridge, and then you follow the towpath of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal for a few miles. And then you hop up onto South Mountain. And when you're on South Mountain, you're on the outskirts of the Antietam battlefield. And so you'll have all these various monuments that were erected by different military units and organizations, to celebrate, what happened at Antietam. This happens to be a monument to the war correspondents, during the Civil War, and many of them were killed because they were right up there where the battles were taking place. A little bit further north, this is in Boonesboro, Maryland, and this is the first monument built to George Washington. And you can go inside. There's a stairway that takes you to the top, and you can get on the top. And during the Battle of Antietam, it was used by the Union Army for artillery spotting. So you have some of this history as you're going through Maryland, and then very soon you get to the Mason-Dixon line. And then right here, this is in southern Pennsylvania, going through this sort of fern field. And when I went through, it was right after a shower, and the aroma coming off the ferns, it was just so wonderful. I mean, I can't describe what the smell was, but it was just so peaceful, picking up that aroma. And that's part of what you'll do as you hike the trail, is just to pick up on everything, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're smelling. And so you just keep going. And in Pennsylvania, you'll pass some of these old iron forges, because this was, iron mining and coal mining was done in this area, and there were all these old forges for making the iron. And then you do finally reach the halfway point of the trail. And at this point, instead of counting up and saying, geez, I've gone 900 miles or 800 miles, you're now counting down and say, oh, geez, I only have 1,000 miles to go. And in fact, you sort of get cocky, think, oh, now I only have 400 miles to go or 500 miles to go. Because you've walked so much, it seems like a much smaller number. And then you do go through the Cumberland Valley, which has some really lush farms. And then you pick up on the Appalachian Trail again. And Pennsylvania does have a reputation for having rocky sections such as this. But then you reach the Susquehanna River. And you'll come off the mountain, you'll follow the road to cross the bridge, which is out here in the distance, to cross the Susquehanna, and then you'll pick up in the mountains and continue your walk. And there is a place in Pennsylvania at Lehigh Gap that's an environmental superfund, because there was a zinc smelter in Palmerston, Pennsylvania, and the fumes from the zinc smelting pretty much poisoned the woods. So there's signs saying, don't gather water, just walk through and get done. So this picture here was taken in 1998. Well, I returned there in 2011, and you can see that the area is starting to come back, because they've been doing some remediation to clean up the soil and to bring it back. And you can see the vegetation is starting to come. And I imagine that's probably what Galena had to go through, because with all the lead mining and smelting of the lead, there probably was some environmental damage done. But you can see that through efforts, a lot of that stuff can be cleaned. And eventually, who knows what, might be another 20 years before this gets wooded again, but the woods are starting to come back. And then it's right about this time, we're now getting into later June, you're going to start seeing blueberries, and you're going to see blueberries all the way to the end of your hike. I probably extended my hike by at least a couple of days from gathering blueberries, because they are just, they're so delicious and so sweet, and they're a complete treat, and they're right there on the trail. And then you finally get to the end of Pennsylvania. This is the Delaware River, and that's what's called the Delaware Water Gap, where There's a gap in the mountains for the river to pass through. And then when you cross into New Jersey, you're going to be walking along Katahdin Ridge in the northwest corner of New Jersey. And if you haven't seen a bear by this point, you're going to see bears in New Jersey, because even though New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country, all the wildlife has been shoved up to the northwest corner of New Jersey. And this area is just loaded with bears that as you're walking along, you'll hear them jump off into the woods. I had one case where there was a baby bear and a mother bear. The mother bear sent the baby bear up the tree, and then the mother bear, stood next to the tree, leaning on it, and just to see what I was doing. And I said, "No, don't worry about me. I'm peaceful. I'm out. I'm not going to take a picture. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to get out of here." And then the next day, at this point, my dog Lucky was walking with me at this point, and there were two bears in front of us walking on the trail. And I kept saying to Lucky, just keep it together. Well, he finally lost it and started barking. And then the two bears just took off. They just went right down the side of the mountain. So you have that. And the other thing that you see when you're up there, this is the first glacial pond that you'll see on the Appalachian Trail. And you'll be seeing glacial ponds for the rest of all the way up through Maine. And then also, when you come off of Katahdin Ridge, you get into a lower elevation area with swamps, and you can see the trail goes to there. And up until this point, I was just using things like citronella and Skin So Soft to keep insects away from me. At this point, I had to switch to full strength DEET because there were bugs everywhere. And also, as you go north and there's more bugs, you want to wear a bandana tightly around your head to keep deer flies from digging into your scalp. But if you wear a tight bandana and you have DEET, you're going to be okay. And you're also going to start getting into, where deer ticks are located, and they cause Lyme disease. So you want to make sure you have enough insect repellent on to keep the ticks away. And at this point, you want to start doing a nightly tick check to make sure you don't have any ticks on you. But then you get into New York State. And this picture, I don't know if you can see it, but this is from the top of Bear Mountain, and it's looking south. And if you look closely, you can see the skyline of Manhattan there. And in fact, you can see where the World Trade Center is. You can see the Empire State Building, but you can see that skyline from the Appalachian Trail. And what was so interesting is it was on this portion of the trail where I saw the fewest number of hikers, even though you're 30 or 40 miles away from New York City. And then from Bear Mountain, you do cross the Hudson River at Bear Mountain, and you can see that you're looking back, so you cross the river, and then you can see the Hudson there. To give you a perspective of where this is, West Point is only a couple of miles away. And during the Revolutionary War, this is a major theater of the Revolutionary War. So the place names of the mountains, there's Fort Defiance Hill, there's Little Fort Hill, there's Fort Hill. And so you also this is where you start running into rock walls. But one thing that was interesting is the Appalachian Trail goes over the shoulder of Little Fort Hill, and then there's a little trail that goes up to the top. And so I went up there thinking, oh, maybe there's going to be some fortifications from the Revolutionary War. But no, instead, here's this chapel that a local Greymoor monastery erected because they own this land, and you've got a statue of Jesus here, you've got an altar. So, and this is just a few feet off of the Appalachian Trail. as you go through. And then, as you keep going north, when you get into Massachusetts, you get into, the trails, the towns off the trail are these classic New England towns with their cemeteries, the congregational churches. This is Lenox, Massachusetts, and this is Lee, Massachusetts. It has the tallest wooden steeple in the country. And then this is the top, and that's my dog Lucky there. This is the top of Mount Greylock, which is the tallest mountain in Massachusetts. And from there, you get into Vermont, and you can see Vermont is just very lush going through the Green Mountains. And then all of a sudden, you hit the White Mountains. And the White Mountains are in New Hampshire. So if you were going, let's say you were going 18 miles a day or 15 miles a day, or maybe even 20 miles or more a day, pretty much your average is going to plummet by at least a third. So if you're doing 18 miles a day, you'll be lucky to do 12 miles a day, because the White Mountains are they're extraordinarily the scenery is extraordinary, but it is really a difficult stretch of hiking. And what's frustrating is this is at the top of Franconia Notch, and you see all these, weekend hikers, tourist hikers, and as a long distance hiker, you're really gamey, you're really beaten up. So seeing people who are clean and everything is just kind of a shock. And then you look at the map and you realize there's easy ways to get up to the top and hard ways to get to the top. The Appalachian Trail always seems to want to choose the hardest way to get up. And then this is looking down at Franconia Notch. But what's nice is where there were a lot of people there, within 5 or 10 minutes, you again have the trail to yourself. And so you can see that, this is what the White Mountains look, and you are at this point above the meteorological timberline. And then you're going to get to what you'll see along the way. There's huts. The Appalachian Mountain Club has built and maintained these huts along the way. And these huts, they provide a cot to sleep on. They have dinner and they have breakfast. And there's a lot of people who make it a vacation to walk from hut to hut to hut. And for long distance hikers, many long distance hikers will do work at a hut to stay there for free, maybe wash dishes or sweep the place out. Because I was with my dog, I did not stay there. We just kept on going. And then you can see what we're right at this point, we're approaching Mount Washington. And Mount Washington is the tallest point in the Whites. It's the tallest point in New Hampshire. And it's famous for having, the highest recorded wind ever. So in the winter, it would just be, horrible weather. But, this was in July or when I came, or August, actually it's August at this point. And there's even a cog railroad that'll take you up to the top of Mount Washington. And then you clear the Whites and you get into Maine. And Maine is absolutely awesome. It is so rugged and it is just so densely full of woods and mountains. But it's really an awesome place to go. And there's this one point in Maine, this is at Mahusic Notch, which is considered to be the toughest mile of the trail, that it's sort of this gap, and all these scree rocks and boulders have fallen in there. So you have to climb up and over and under to get through this area. It took me about 45 minutes to cover the 1 mile. Some people take, a couple of hours, but I was able to get through it in about as I say, 45 minutes. And then this is Mahusic Arm. So after doing the notch, now you got to climb up to the top of that mountain to continue your walk. And as you go through Maine, you can just see it's just never-ending woods, no matter where you look. There is logging in Maine, but there's just so many woods there that it just goes on forever. and you can see how thick these are. Because it's rocky there, the roots are close to the top. And if you see in this picture, that's the trail going through here, and those roots are as big as your thigh. And then you do get to the point where you see Mount Katahdin. And at this point, you really are full of mixed emotions, because this is what you've been aiming for all these months. You've been aiming for Katahdin, and now you see the goal. So there's one thing that says, let's run as quick as we can to get there. And there's another side of you that says, let's just let's hold back, and just keep going through this wonderful countryside. But you do get to Katahdin, and you have to climb up. You climb up through these rocks, and then when you get to the top, you can look back at the area that you came from. And then you finally get to the top to end the trail. Now, one of the things that was kind of a bummer about Katahdin is it's in Baxter State Park in Maine, and they don't allow dogs. So my dog Lucky, he couldn't go to the top. And one of the things I like to do, I always include in these talks, is a quote from Lucky, because Lucky and I spent so much time together that we had conversations, and Lucky told me this: all walks are good. I don't know how long this walk is going to be, but I do know one thing. This is the best walk I've ever been on, because this is the walk I am on right now. And so, if you're interested in the book, there aren't any local outlets that carry the book, but you can get it at my website. You can get it at Amazon. And also, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have if you don't ask them tonight. And I can be reached at that email address, davidryan@msn.com. And with that, I'll be happy to turn this over to any questions that people have.
There's a question from Susan H. in the chat. How dog-friendly are the towns? I'd like to section hike the trail with my dog, but want to be sure that they're to find safe places to stay where I can leave the dog while I shop, etc.
All right. Well, what I did, is that the only place where dogs can't go is in Great Smoky Mountain National Park and Baxter State Park. Dogs can go on any other place on the trail. And in the towns, there are motels. You usually have to pay maybe a little bit extra for the dogs. And, like Neil's Gap, where, I showed that was in Georgia, they have a hostel, but the dogs weren't allowed there. But the owner there, he had another cabin that he let the dogs and I stay in. So it was, I think dogs add a lot. But with me, I always stayed in a tent with dogs, because that way they wouldn't bother other people, because there are always a few people that don't like dogs. So you just do that. But I would say, when I took Lucky into trail towns, if I were resupplying, I wouldn't leave him in a motel. I would just tie him up in front. Now, also, I should say that when I did my long distance hike, my wife and I, we started in 1997. We got 350 miles into the trail, and she broke her leg. So then we had to get off the trail, and we did other things. We came back to the trail, from where she broke her leg the next year. But after 2 weeks, she had to quit hiking because her leg still wasn't strong enough. And at that point, I kept hiking. She went and got adopted Lucky, and then she joined up with me. And then Lucky and I would hike together, and then we would meet my wife Claudia at a trail crossing, and we would camp out together. And then the next day, Lucky and I would hike. So my wife was, my wife was there, so she could take care of Lucky once in a while too. But I think if you have a dog, your dog will love it. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was going to say that some of the reasons that you gave at the beginning of the talk for people wanting to do the Appalachian Trail, to through hike it, are very similar to the ones that people give for doing the pilgrimage in Santiago, Spain.
I've done that also.
You have? Okay, great.
Yeah, and that was great. Yeah, but you're right, because I live in New Mexico, and the Continental Divide Trail runs through New Mexico, but that would be a really, really hard hike, because there's the distance between resupply points is very long, and water is super problematic. So I just think the Appalachian Trail, it's not easy. It's much harder than people expect. But once you get yourself into that hiking, it takes maybe a couple weeks, and then you reach that point where you're ready to just go. And as I say, because of the water, because of the resupply, it's perfect. And the other thing is, you have a community, because even though there's quite a few people on the trail, everybody starts at a different time. And so therefore, you pretty much have the trail to yourself. When you stop for lunch, all of a sudden other people will come by that you'll see, and you'll camp out near a shelter, and there'll be other people. But for most of the day, you'll have a lot of times. But what's valuable about having other hikers and this community is when Claudia broke her leg, we were 5 miles away from the nearest road crossing. And so, we left our packs, we put a note on what happened, and we tried to sort of, work our way down. Well, that wasn't working very well. But within 15 minutes, this other hiker who was young and strong, he came along, other hikers came along. And so through the combined efforts of everybody, we were able to get Claudia to a point where search and rescue could then take her off. And that's the value of having a community, because everybody, and it's such a special community, because it doesn't matter what your occupation is, that everybody's doing the same thing, and everybody's there together. That there was a group of young people from Boston who were bicycle messengers. Well, I was in, before doing the Appalachian Trail, I had a business job, so I never would have had the opportunity to interact with a bicycle messenger. But on the trail, everybody's the same, and so it's just sort of a special community that's out there. Good. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have some more questions in the chat here.
Yeah.
Let me just scroll up a little bit. When you finished the hike, what was your return trip?
Oh, well, when you get to the top of Katahdin, you have to hike back down. And when I went to the top of Katahdin, I met a guy who had all kinds of questions about the trail. So we got down. Well, he was just there for a day hike, so he gave me a ride into oh gosh, I forget now. So I'm getting it, but to the closest town to Katahdin, and that's where my wife and Lucky were. So he gave me a ride to the motel where they were staying. But also, I should point out that I did this hike when I was I finished the long hike. I've done several shorter hikes, but the long hike, I finished that when I was 51. And to do that, my wife and I, my kids had just gotten out of college, so I was able to, Millinocket is the town. Yeah, there it is. Thank you so much. My wife and I, my kids got out of college, so I was at a point where my wife and I, we both quit our jobs. We sold our house, put everything in storage, and we spent 2 years doing different things, including the Appalachian Trail. So there was no, let's say a return trip. We just sort of, well, our return trip is that we ended up in New Mexico, after doing the Appalachian Trail. Good. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have a question from Teresa in Australia.
Okay.
Asks, are there accommodation huts the whole way, or are there only shelters?
Okay, there are, on the Appalachian Trail, there are shelters. There are the huts in the White Mountains, but in all the other places, it's just shelters or places with tents. So it's not like the Camino where you're staying in albergues every night, but in the actual towns near the trail, many of them will have hostels for people who are on a tighter budget. They'll have motels and those things. So there is a range of accommodations when you get to towns. But on the trail, your choice is either sleeping in a tent or sleeping in an open shelter.
All right. Patricia asks, what other long distance hikes have you done?
Well, I've done the Camino, and I've done, I do a lot of hiking. One of the books I wrote was 60 Hikes Within 60 Miles of Albuquerque. And there's 60 hikes books for most of the large, major cities in the country. And, but the Appalachian, I've done other sections of the Appalachian Trail, but the Appalachian Trail and the Camino would be the two longest hikes I've done.
Have you ever considered doing the Pacific Coast Trail?
I've done parts of the Pacific Coast Trail, and the problem that you have on the Pacific Coast Trail is that you have a lot of deserts beginning there. So if you don't have the ability to hike long distances right away, you're not going to have, you're going to have trouble with water. Then the other issue that you have on the Pacific Coast Trail is that the snow in the higher mountains isn't going to go away until June. And there's some years where the snow never goes away. And so to do a continuous hike from end to end is very difficult, that you're going to end up hopscotching. I don't know if you saw the movie Wild or read the book Wild, but she started her hike. Well, then she had a hopscotch because there was just, there was too much snow. You couldn't get through it. Now, somebody had a question about carrying a firearm across there. And, I personally would never carry a firearm. I never felt any kind of danger. There were a couple of shelters that I saw where it looked like somebody was squatting in them, but I just kept on going. And there were a couple people that, might have been a little bit, let's say had some type of mood disorder or something, but you just sort of avoid those people because the reality is that somebody who really wants to cause trouble, they aren't going to hike to get to it. There's plenty of places to cause trouble. Now, certainly there have been incidences that have happened. And somebody asked about going in a group, that you can go in a group, but what you'll find is that everybody will sort of develop their own pattern. And so it'll be such that you'll be with a group of people, and then you'll be, not with them, but maybe with another group of person. And if you're hiking if you start off by yourself, you will meet somebody who is, of the same pace, the same outlook on life as you, and you may find a hiking partner that way. So because there's going to be plenty of people around to create that community, whether whether you started off with somebody or not. Any other questions?
Do you recommend receiving supplies at post offices along the trail? I know some people do that.
Yeah. Now, what I did, a lot of people will get, will do mail drops for their supplies. Now, the only issues with that are that you might get tired of the food that you're sending, and you have to do a lot of pre-prep to put those boxes together, and you're also going to have somebody who's a support person. Now, if you're resupplying along the way, you might run into some issues that, some of these small town markets might have a lot of overpriced, outdated food that you don't want. So it's a balance. But what I did because obviously you are going to have to resupply, you're going to have to carry supplies. Things like maps and guides and reading material, like I made War and Peace my reading project for the trail, but I cut it up into sections. And so I made pouches with maps, guidebook sections, and War and Peace in pouches. And my mother-in-law, she mailed them to the proper places. And the other thing that I did is I created a bounce box. So things like extra filter for, a spare filters for your water filter, spare batteries, things like shaving gear or, cleaning gear, I would put them in a bounce box, and then I would mail them up the trail. When I went into a store to get supplies, maybe I didn't need all of those supplies, and maybe there was nobody else to give them to. Well, what I didn't need and I didn't want to throw away, I'd put them in my bounce box and mail them up the trail. And so consequently, and at the same time, I had at that time it was called mailboxes, etc. They're now called UPS stores. But I had I had a mailbox in Chicago, so I would contact them to bundle up my mail and mail it to me in care of general delivery. So I could get into a town and there would be a pouch of maps, my mail, and my bounce box. So it was like Christmas getting all these boxes at the mail. And so I don't know if I've answered your question, but you can certainly work it both ways on resupply, whether it's mail drops or buying along the way or doing a mixture. Good.
Well, another question I have, what guides and maps are the best ones to use? Because there's quite a few that are available.
Well, what you need, and one of the things in the book I wrote, to give me a little bit of a commercial, the long distance hike and the Appalachian Trail for the older adventurer, is just like you say, there's so much information out there that you don't know exactly what to do. And I wrote the book as a pilot guide to point you in the direction as to what you need to have on the trail, what type of gear you need and what the experience is like. And so the one thing you want is a through hiker's guide. The through hiker's guide, there's two of them out there. There's one, there's one that's published by Appalachian Long Distance Hikers Association. And then there's this one that's called the AT Guide. And what these books have is they have in the towns where the services are located, because that's what you need to know is, okay, does this town have a store so I can resupply? Does it have a motel where I can take a shower? Does it have a laundromat where I can do laundry? Because when you get into town, the first thing you're going to do is go to the post office to get your stuff. You're going to get a place to sleep. You'll probably want to take a shower. And then you want to resupply and then just chill out. So, and that's what you need. And it was this type of a guide that I cut up into sections. You don't really need a trail guide, but I think maps are important. So because the maps, the maps give you a much bigger range of data than your iPhone will or a computer screen will. And one of the things that you'll do, you don't have to overthink what you're doing. If you're going to do a hike, you want to have sort of a general plan as to where you think you might resupply. So that's important to know. So you know how to set up your pouches. Then as you hike, then when you get to a town, then you want to figure out, okay, when's the next town? And that tells you how much food you're going to get. But if you try to plan it all out before you go, it's going to be a waste of time because you may be hiking faster or slower than what you intended to do. So, so that's what I would recommend. But I do recommend having a map and having a through hiker guide to give you an idea of what services are available in those towns. And they also have maps of the towns, so you know where they're located, where the post office is, where the motel is, where the store is. Good. Anything?
Yeah, I was going to add one more point. There's even books that I like that show the curve and gradients for the entire trail.
Yeah, well, there's the elevation profiles.
Right.
And somebody asked, is the trail well marked? Yes, the Appalachian Trail is well marked. But one of the things that you can do, you may not be paying attention and may miss a blaze and get off the wrong way. If you find yourself in a place like that, turn around to see if there's a blaze that you can see for people going the other way. And if you can't, then backtrack until you can see a blaze. But there are plenty of blazes on the Appalachian Trail. It's well marked. Good. Anything else? And as I say, if there's questions I didn't answer, feel free to send me an email and I'll be happy to answer them.
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation, David.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me and thank you for coming.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for everyone who came, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.